Welcome, Jean-Michel.
Right.
Jean-Michel, you as an outsider, just tell us, because I think it is of interest, what was unique about the Rhodesian army that struck you compared to the other armies of the time?
That's a good question, and I've often observed it before, having been in military before Rhodesia and after, albeit later on reserve. So, French and also being exposed in this country to the US military. I think as you know, the essence of any army, it's its troops and its leadership. In the case of the troops, it's really what you rely most on. Having experienced that in other military, I realized that, and okay, this is in the context of the mid-late 70s, obviously. Europe is coming out, or still is, in its kind of post-60s cultural changes, where wars have gone away, youth have softened, a lot of protests in colleges and that kind of thing. And I'd been through this, done my national service, and then I arrived in Rhodesia. And they used to have that joke that says, "Welcome to Salisbury Airport and reset your watch 20 years or something." In my sense, this was a compliment, because that society, I'm talking about the European society, and to a large extent, the Black population had retained values, a way of life, ethics, and ethos, which pertain to the previous generation. Having experienced also what the basic private soldier was in the French military, I was very interested to observe the case in Rhodesia. Your raw material was already of excellent quality. Kids coming out of very good schools. I know there were differences between schools, but by and large, the schools were very good. Traditional teaching, sports, ethos, discipline. Kids who went to boarding schools, to Plumtree and other places, knew what discipline was. They knew what it was to be pushed around as a skivvy. So when they came into the military, they were better equipped than any other 18-year-old in any Western society then, and of course, even now. So that difference made already created a huge gap in the way these kids were. So they were fully equipped, they were prepared. And coming into the military was just a transition. It was not changing the life completely. And I've heard other people, Log Hansen sort of thing, praising this 18, 19 years old corporal. Well, they stem from that background and breeding, as the Brits call it. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, of course, not all the kids came from a farming background, but you were never far away from the bush, never far away from farming life with friends. So everybody had been hunting, shooting rifles, fishing, trekking through the bush. As I say, good education, good discipline, used to be self-reliant, little comfort. I myself grew up in the 60s on the commercial farm in Morocco, and we didn't have television, we didn't have electricity, we had a generator. So I had a very pleasant youth, but we didn't live in this kind of comfort people live in. And I think the average Rhodesian kid stemmed from a similar background.
Yes.
That was the one thing. Secondly, obviously, the big difference also was they were in their own country and they were fighting their own war. Contrary to some conscript from, let's say, Portugal, who would be sent off Mozambique, did not understand what the war was about, couldn't see, came from a small village or a small fishing town in Portugal and landed in Mozambique and Angola. Your Rhodesian soldier was at home. The war was all around you. And from the younger age, you were exposed to it. Mm-hmm. When I talked to my wife, as I told you, who's a Rhodesian from Mount Pleasant, she was exposed to that from the younger age. And it was no big deal. So mentally, psychologically, people were fully prepared and equipped to confront that. The other thing about the Rhodesians is that, you know, everybody, they could fix everything. You know, they could maintain, repair. My wife can fix anything in the house. You know, that's something that she keeps doing. And that was, you know, it's an important thing because the people were never at a loss of what to do next. Okay. And this self-reliance, we had no money, obviously, then. So we couldn't go and buy the next piece of equipment or change this. Everything had to be fixed. Everything had to work. If you look at all the innovation that came sometimes from, you know, troopies going to Faraday's and getting, you know, a webbing jacket made up basically from a fishing or hunting jacket. I'd never seen that before. In fact, it did not exist. And I'm pretty sure the Rhodesian invented that concept of this, you know, Fire Force jacket. Same happened with, you know, the camouflage weapon. I'd never seen, if you looked at pictures of the Vietnam Wars, American soldiers walking around with black rifles, M16. The first time I saw rifles that were painted in camouflage was in Rhodesia. And you can, you know, you can go on about all these examples coming from what the Air Force did to the helicopters, to the planes, how the vehicles you know, mine-proof vehicles. Again, they call it MRAPs now. Those things cost $500,000 in the US. That was fixed, you know, done in the back of a garage in Rhodesia originally. So the concept of this V-shaped mine-proof vehicle came out of this. So you have to realize it's stemming out of a minute population of European population of 200,000 people. The level of ingenuity, of innovation, of self-reliance was extraordinary. The other thing I like about also Rhodesian soldiers, my troopies, is the great sense of humor. Those kids were inflammable. Sure, people went through stress. There's other thing, you know, they had grown up in these days you would say macho. I would say more now kind of martial, virile ethos. And you didn't show your pain, you didn't show your fear, you didn't show, you know, you didn't show your feelings. You just bit your lip and did your job. But next to that, grand sense of humor. I have memories of people saying incredible things in the middle of, you know, the most harrowing situation. And that helped a lot. That carried us through so many things. And it's something really I always find remarkable, always remarkable. Just to mention an example, you know, we had that, I think it was on a Saturday morning, there was that Forces Favorites when, you know, girlfriends would call in on the radio and dedicate the song to the boyfriend and with the usual warning, keep away from the brown bottles, you know. And I remember once we got called out on the Saturday morning on the Fire Force deployment, just before that. And we went out and we're in the middle of a punch up. And one of my troopies, we're firing away. This is really in the heat of the action. And he's looking at his watch and he said, shit, we're going to miss the Forces Favorite. We won't be back on base on time. And you say in the middle of something like this, for a kid that age to think only about something like this, for me, it's really symptomatic of the spirit and the character of these kids. So, you know, I don't want to give the impression that I idolize all this, but really I can't compare. I can compare to the kids that age I met before I went to Rhodesia and those I met afterwards. I'm not saying that they aren't, you know, brave soldiers and soldiers in the other, but the proportion we have out of this population, you have to remember you had many troopies who had the same level of education, the same upbringing as the officers.
Yes.
They've been in schools. They played rugby together. Yeah. And you can imagine how daunting it must have been for a young officer, fresh out of School of Infantry, and finding himself with kids that he was at school with under him. That kid had another already 2 years of experience as a lance corporal, and you come in as a fresh second lieutenant, and you really have to prove yourself. He knows everything about you. He knew you at school, he knows your flaws. And when I went into the French military, I went in as a fresh second lieutenant. Nobody knew me. You know, I had my platoon sergeant. He didn't know my background. I come from, you know, college-educated people, and you could get away with things as long as you turned to platoon sergeant. In Rhodesia, you couldn't. Everybody knew everybody, you know, from school, from girlfriends, from family. So all these things, you know, I think forged this whole ethos, whole mentality. We did have some people who were not always up to par, but by and large, the raw material were of such exceptional quality. Because it pertains to the time as well, but also to the overall environment. You know, people being used to the war situation, to lack of food, basic needs. So for me, it was, again, an experience and something I keep comparing to what one witnesses these days.
I think you did right, Jean, about pointing out the fact that one thing Rhodesians were always good at was laughing at themselves. And I do remember a saying from the RLI, which went, you probably remember it, you can call me anything you like, but for fuck's sakes, don't call me late for a piss-up.
That's right.
I mean, there were no sacred cows, and you just had to take everything on the chin, and that was just a great way to be. And I think that's where a lot of us struggle today. I certainly do, where you've got to choose your words so carefully because everything is likely to give offense. The world we grew up in, nothing was offensive. You could say absolutely anything, and it was just, you had to live with it. And that was a far more relaxed way to live than we do today.
Absolutely.
But Jean, I know you don't want to, you're a little shy about your own experiences, but I'm going to ask you again to talk about some of the personal experiences, whether they were highs or lows, that that stick in your mind, because you were in the thick of it for several years. And I'm going to ask you again if there's any stories that you'd like to relate from your combat experiences.
Probably a couple of situations. As I said before, anybody who was in the war, in the RLI, on fire force for the last 2 years of the war saw an equal share of combat, okay, and jumps and everything else. So describing this or that context, I think, is of limited interest as far as I'm concerned. But the couple of occasions where I'm sure it happened to you. Often people ask you, oh, you were in a war where you were scared. And it's always difficult to describe fear, okay? What does that mean, were you scared?
Yeah.
For me, fear is something that takes over your senses, controls you, makes you irrational, and basically you're not functioning anymore. That's what I would describe fear. I'll tell you one thing I'm scared of is heights, and I'll explain to you. That's something I can say vocally. I am scared of heights. Was I scared in the combat situation? No, because I think I was in control of my senses. I was extremely anxious. I was tense. I was under pressure. But that has a reverse effect, in my view, of fear. All your senses are multiplied. Everything you do, as you know, we went into this suicidal fire for a sweep line, waiting for the enemies to shoot at us. Of course, your stomach was in a knot, but I would not describe this fear, and I never saw it around me. At least nobody showed it. The two couple of situations I'll mention where I feared, my fear was about being captured. Because when you're in the combat, you don't see, unfortunately, the bullets are not visible. unless people are using tracers. So you don't really see how close you are to being killed. In a way, it's reassuring. It can be a bit of noise. But we're in a situation where you're not under control. And for me, it was to be captured in Indian country, in enemy territory. So I had maybe two episodes I would like to mention, because they also tie up to other memories. Once we did a SAS backup into Mozambique in the Gaza province, as we call it, the Russian front. We didn't do as much in a subtle way as the SAS did. So we went as a fighting patrol, maybe 30, 40 of us, going through the bush, not very cautious. We were out there to mine roads and that sort of thing, and basically to look for trouble. I think the second day, early in the morning, we having a breakfast very casually, and all of a sudden there's a fire, a contact that breaks up. In fact, there were some Frelimos looking for us, and all hell broke loose then. And one distinct thing I remember, I'm standing about 3 feet away from Bob Cajun. Bob Cajun was a character. He was a native Canadian, a Canadian Indian, impressive guy, excellent soldier. So Bob stood up and he's holding his fan and he's going to swing around towards where the fire is coming from. And I'm, as I said, 2 to 3 feet away from him. I'm holding my mug. I was having tea, and he's holding his FN. And next minute we hear that whoosh sound of the RPG-7, and his rifle butt just goes, and he's standing there with a pistol grip, and there's no rifle butt there. And I'm here, and in fact, I had a wooden spoon, and the first thing that says, "Oh, I must put my wooden spoon away. I mustn't lose that spoon." So that was my thinking. In the process, I had a revolver, an American, 6-pack cowboy thing, which I bought from a guy, and I lost it then. I didn't realize that. So I was more concerned about that wooden spoon. But anyway, as this happened, we had to pack and go, and we had to make our way back to the border. And we were chased the whole day. We found out later there was a whole battalion of Frelimo looking for us. My fear then was to get captured, okay? So we had fleeting contact, we bombshell, people got separated. And eventually the main body of our patrol made it to the border, and they opened up a gap in the, the cordon sanitaire to let us in. But some guys were lost for a while. And I'm mentioning this because beside the fact that at that time, my fear was to be captured. And then I realized, by the way, when I did the SAS selection later on, the virtue of that selection, because that selection was starting with a 36 or 48 hours rev, where you didn't eat, you didn't sleep, you didn't rest, and you were pushed around. And that was really testing your resistance to this kind of situation. Okay, and this is what happened to us, because basically we were chased and we had no water left, no food, no rest. So I understood, as I said, what the selection was about in that particular exercise. Now I'm mentioning this because 3 guys, remember, out of all these guys, got separated. 2 guys, Terry Tangney, Australian guy, and Rob Hutchinson, Hutch, were separated, were together, stick around, and managed eventually. But it was quite dicey and very difficult for them. And sadly, these guys survived that. But then years later, Terry Tangney took his own life in Australia. And Rob Hutchinson was killed in the Matola raid, in fact, 40 years ago, last week, or 2 weeks ago, when I was with him in SAS Recce. So having survived that very harrowing situation. And the third guy was a Canadian guy, Ron Perverznov. He was of a Canadian of Russian or Ukrainian origin, and his name, Perverznov, nobody could pronounce it. So because he sounded a bit like Smirnov, we called him Vodka. So he was private, trooper vodka. And Ron got separated. He was on his own. And we all managed to make our way back in larger groups, small groups. But he was lost, I think, for a couple of days. And we thought he'd been captured. And eventually, the Air Force spotted him, brought him back. Again, praise to the blue jobs, as they call them. These guys will go in anywhere, anytime. We used to laugh at them, having tea in the morning and having a shower when they wanted. But those guys were the bravest of the bravest. So Ron was lost, and eventually they found him and they brought him back. And I remember him coming, the helicopter bringing him at the Alouette. And so we all went towards him. And he was sitting at the back looking at us. He was as white as a sheet, and he was shaking his head like saying, you don't know what I've been through. Sadly, another sad story is out of these guys who survived that ordeal is that after the war, he went and joined the French Foreign Legion. He served for 5 years in the parachute regiment, and then went on to Yugoslavia when the war was going on, the civil war. He joined one of the local militias or something. And in the group he was in, there was another guy, Yugoslav, Croatians or Serbian, whatever, claiming that he'd been in the French Foreign Legion. They had a bit of an argument about that. The other guy obviously hadn't, but took umbrage and murdered him. So I mentioned this because for me it was one thing, my first time where I thought I was going to be captured, and that was my big fear, I would say. And then these three guys who survived all this to then meet a tragic or untimely death. That's one thing. The other thing I would mention again, similar circumstances, again, fearing to be captured. And this is now fast forward to Operation Uric. We call it Mapai usually,
Yes.
I was deployed there. In fact, I wasn't supposed to be on that op because I'd gone on leave for the first time in almost 2 years, back to Europe and to Morocco where my parents were still living. I came back from leave and my brother came with me. My brother was an officer cadet in the French medical school. And I said, so he came back with me and I said, I had another 10 days, I think, or 2 weeks of leave. And I'll say, I'll take you around. So we went to Big Falls, came back, and I said, I'm going to take you to Cremon Barracks. You're going to meet my friends. And as I arrived there, as I say, I'm still on leave. I still have another 10 days to go. People are running around the support commander. So I say, what's going on? This is the biggest external coming up. So we just getting ready. And I said, we cannot miss this. So I canceled my leave. My brother was very upset, still is, because I took him back to my flat and he had no money. In those days, there was no credit card, nothing. So he just had a bit of cash. I disappeared. He was left in a strange city, knew nobody, and left in. And I said, I'll be back in about 2-3 days' time. Little did we know. So as I said, I wasn't supposed, but I just dropped everything I was doing. I canceled my leave and I went on another operation. I was in a mining party and we were a group of 268. I was 2IC of the group, led by another guy who sadly took his own life. We call him Sergeant Mike. And we're being deployed. So for a couple of days, we are between the admin base, which was deep inside the territory, and the Rhodesian borders. We were mining roads, Massengena, all these places. I think a second day or so, one evening, it's dusk, and we're moving towards our next target, which is the road. And we see a young girl. I remember she was kind of the tallest, about 200 yards away, and she's walking. Just local girl, and all of a sudden she starts speeding up. So I said to Mike, she's seen us. And he said, no, she hasn't even turned her head. She didn't look at us. I said, Mike, she's seen us. We should pull back. He wasn't convinced, but anyway, we pulled back a bit. So, and I said, you know what? We should ask for extraction tomorrow. We're going to be compromised. Sure enough, sunset, and we can hear already some trucks coming in. And then next morning, more trucks coming in. Couldn't see anything. We could hear the noise. Trucks stopping, door slammings, tailgates dropping, clicking of weapons and that sort of thing. And then we realized we were in deep, deep trouble. So we are sitting, there's a big clearing, it's a tree line. And we had called the choppers asking for extraction. And we can hear all the noise through the bushes. We couldn't see the guys coming through, but we realized there was, oops, I dropped something. We realized that they were started sweeping through the bushes. And so there's a big clearing and we are standing on the other side, maybe 200 meters across. We packed, ready to jump. And the two choppers flew over the tree line. And then you could see all of a sudden, all the bullets, the traces flying up, RPGs. And so the choppers came up, they landed probably about, I don't know, 60, 70 yards away from us. It wasn't an orderly boarding. This was not an airport boarding with people showing their boarding pass. We started, fell at the back. We started running towards the first helicopter, which was quickly fully booked. And then it wasn't a question of getting the same six organized. Let's get out of here. So go to the first chopper, fills up very quickly. I switched to the other one. By then, you have bullets flying all over the place and RPGs. And I said, again, it was the thought of being captured. That was really what I was worried about. Anyway, got into the chopper on the back. Then had my gunner on the right. And I remember I was holding my rifle like this and I was shaking and I dropped it on my lap. So that was my second really, out of all these episodes, because it's something you cannot control. There's nothing you can do. If the guys hit you or that helicopter gets hit, we took off and we were firing all over the place. And again, those pilots, heroes, because they would fly in any kind of things and they saved their skin those days. So these are two episodes I remember because, again, it was something which was not like being in a sweep line, being in a sweep line was extremely, extremely stressful because you were just waiting for the bullets to hit you. But in a way, you were tuned in and you would move forward. Nobody would flinch. Everybody would stay, those kids, again, talking about those 18 years old kids out of school. Some of them were out of school, they'd done their 4 months training. And nobody was falling behind. You just moved to target, waiting to be shot at. That was Fire Force tactics. That was different. But there you couldn't, you get in the chopper, it's going to be shot down. You can't control anything. And then you don't want to be captured because you didn't know what would happen to you. So these are, 2 episodes, I would say, where I got very, very worried about, whether I was going to to have a family later,
So you just touched on an issue that something that I'd like to know more about because I know how many tragedies unfolded after the war with chaps committing suicide, and I know a lot of guys who I think drank themselves to death. And it was a lot to do with this war, this post-traumatic issue, which is much talked about today. But I think you'll agree, in the Rhodesian experience, there wasn't much of a cushion for the chaps who'd taken a pounding. There was very little facility for anyone to have anybody to talk to. And there have been lots of suicides and lots of sad ends to young lives, which I think is a knock-on effect from this war experience.
I think, well, personally, I was a bit older. Okay, I was already, I think, 23, 24. It makes a big difference. Makes a big difference. I wouldn't say I was battle hardened, but I was older. A few years at age count a lot. Kid out of school, they come out, they were strong guy, rugby players and that sort of thing. So they thought they were fully equipped to go into the war. They volunteered to go into the RLI. There's national service guys. Okay, they were not drawn in. Then we were in, and we realized, obviously, some of them realized that I could get killed. Okay, but I tell you, I never saw any of these kids flinch. I remember there was a kid called Ken Myberg. I think his first name was Ken. And he, one of my troopies came to me. He was in a different troop. And he said, look, Ken, he thinks he's going to get killed. And I said, well, we all do, don't we? And I didn't say that in a cynical fashion, is that we all went through this feeling as we were, particularly as we were in this 5-4 sweep line that, any bullet could catch you at any time. And we live with it. We live with that knot in our guts. And he said, no, he's really been talking a lot about it. And I kind of dismissed it. And I said, talk to him, something like that. And he was killed. He was killed. So he had like a premonition. I think a lot of this control stress probably, manifested itself later on.
Yes.
Those kids were very young. I'm a bit cynical about it. There's been, in all honesty, some people who use this as a pretext for doing the wrong things in their lives. Okay. Yeah. I think everybody was on equal footing. The huge majority of these kids walked away from that war unscathed. They went on with their lives. They went to college. They had normal lives. Some people, lacking any conflict, suffered more from it, with everything that came with it, alcoholism and drugs and that sort of thing. So my view is a bit split on this issue, and I don't want to sound cynical. I didn't suffer from it, but again, what do you know about something you don't suffer from? How can you judge other people? Everybody has his own psyche, his own way. And I was older. I was 23, 24. It makes a big difference. Makes a big difference. And but I remember the thing about Michael. We should have pulled him out. If he had that kind of premonition, I don't know. You always feel a bit guilty. He wasn't one of my troopies. Now Log Anson was good. They're going around, our CSM and just picking up these vibes. And but as long as he knew about it, if he didn't, then there's nothing you could do, And a lot of these kids would bottle everything in because you know what the Rhodesian psyche was. You had to be strong. You had to be a man. You show your fear. So. And they did. That's how they behaved. Even if they were scared, I never saw a guy flinch or personally. Doesn't mean that they were not scared. They might have been terrified. But they did their job. They did their job.
Jean, just fast forwarding. I mean, you've been involved in the security business for a long time now. What, looking at the counterinsurgency wars that are being fought at the moment, what lessons do you think modern armies might learn from the Rhodesian experience as you remember it?
Well, I can tell you, because I served in the French military reserve afterwards, and even nowadays I'm in contact with people. They looked at the counterinsurgency operation in Rhodesia as a source of information. Of course, wars are not comparable, okay? But we did, and we invented some concept, the Fire Force concept, which kind of were derived from the French experience in Algeria. We first used helicopters, for what they call tactical envelopment, and then the Portuguese used that because the Portuguese were at war before us in Mozambique and Angola, so they adapted some of the French tactics. But all this was perfected by the Rhodesian in the Fire Force. That's one thing. So that particular concept, in some circumstances, can or cannot be used. The other thing was using, troops like Selous-Kat, pseudo troops. Okay, that had been used in Kenya by the Brits and other places, but I'd say it was perfected by the Rhodesians. And we knew how the combination of Selous-Kat, Recce troops, teams, and fire force. The combination was outstanding. These two elements were what brought the large number of kills during the war. So fast forwarding to operations these days, a lot of people have asked me and they're interested in the tactics we used. It's not always applicable. You have to understand one thing also, is that your average Rhodesian soldier was in and out of that war constantly. We were out for 10 days at a time on R&R and back in. Out 10 days, rest and recuperate, go back in. So there was no loss of experience, of reflexes. If you look at Afghanistan, if you look at Iraq, people would go in, some armies only six months, others 12 months, and then would come back for another 2 years. So that edge, that experience is quickly lost.
Yes.
In the way people react to this. Yes. So we had a unique situation. First of all, we were fighting in our own country. We were on our own ground. We were not some overseas troop transplanted into some foreign country, okay? But the fire force concept, the Selous-Kat concept of pseudo gangs infiltrating is something which a lot of people have tried, and they're still trying to do it. The other difference is that we had meager resources. Alouettes were never used as for troop transport. They were just reconnaissance. We use them to transport troops, 4 guys at a time.
Yes.
Nowadays, use helicopters with 12, 13, 20 guys. So you cannot compare the hardware which is being deployed now, plus all the drones and you name it, satellite imaging. But some of the concepts that we develop are being used. And there's always interest on the part of, I talk to people in the US Special Forces, in the French Special Forces, always interested in those concepts that we developed at the time, We have some very innovative and daring concepts which we applied, and that can maybe applied in certain circumstances, wherever it compares to the context in which we operated. So in many respects, we're pioneers in some of these tactics. Of course, times have changed. We didn't have satellites, we didn't have drones, we didn't have all these things, But at the end of the day, you know what? In Afghanistan or anywhere else, your opponent is still running around with an antiquated AK and still does a lot of damages. And they haven't won this war. I mean, the Americans have been in Afghanistan for 20 years. The war was really never won.
Yes.
In Iraq, okay? So I think we did pretty well with a very limited means. Given the territory we had to cover with so few troops, we did pretty well.
Yeah, I suppose the lesson that modern armies are still learning is that technology can only take you so far. You still need good men on the ground who are resourceful and resilient and can track and survive and understand the local surroundings. You can only do so much with technology at the end of the day, I suspect. I mean, I haven't been involved in any modern wars, but as you say, the Americans with all their resources still don't seem to have made a huge impression in Afghanistan or Iraq, where these wars continue.
No, it hasn't been stabilized. None of the countries have been stabilized up to 20 years. So somewhere we did a few things right, but our numbers were so tiny. That was our problem, But there isn't one single, even 4-man stick in the Rhodesian army that was defeated in the field. At the end of the day, that's the way you have to look at it, okay? And we were not defeated in the field.
It's funny you mentioned that, actually, Jean, because, when I tell people that we came out of recruits course and off we went in 4-man sticks, with a map and a compass. That doesn't happen in many modern armies today, does it?
It certainly doesn't. The other thing we did, which we probably would do differently now, going to war in shorts and t-shirts, okay? That was nice, comfortable, but not the best thing to save lives. That's for sure. Now, compared to today's troops, if you look at any Western army, completely covered with armor, and all these spaghetti things and radios and everything, all the equipment they have, we could have saved a number of lives. That's for sure. If we had this kind of protection. But at the same time, it was about the spirit, okay? The thing about the Rhodesians is that they didn't fear the enemies, and that makes a big difference, okay? So we did those sort of things with the spirit that you might, of course, still find in Western military, but going to war in your shorts and t-shirts is something that nobody would possibly conceive these days. Absolutely not. Okay, and that would have spared a lot of casualties. That's for sure. That's for sure.
Jean-Michel, just everybody wants to know more about the French Foreign Legion. What is the state of the Legion today? Are they still a formidable fighting force they have a reputation for being?
As you know, there was an attempt in Rhodesia to create a foreign legion when someone gave the idea, an ill-fated idea, to the Rhodesian military to form a unit made of entirely of foreign volunteers, like a foreign legion, a French foreign legion. Sadly, this was a terrible experience. What I heard is that the guy who was in charge of going out, he said that he could go out and recruit people straight out of the French Foreign Legion and then bring him to Rhodesia and maybe form a battalion, 400 to 500 men to do this. In the process, the guy just picked up guys off the streets, some ex-military, some young guys kind of daydreaming about distant glories, and about, I think, 60 of them, he got money to recruit them, and he, disappeared with the rest of the money. And those guys arrived in Rhodesia, and it was a complete disaster. Yes. Okay, so that will be maybe for another story.
Yeah.
The French Foreign Legion has been in existence since 1830. Okay, it's always functioned the same way. Only foreigners can join it. There are some French people in the Foreign Legion, but they join under an assumed identity, different name, and another nationality. Okay, they're about 20%. The rest are foreigners. So the Legion is pretty much present on all the battlefields. There is no more conscription in France for the past 25 years or so, 20 years, I guess. No, more than that. So it's only a professional army. So the French Foreign Legion is about 9,000 strong, which is a big chunk of the army itself. And it's the first force that we deploy in all those overseas, bushfires or whatever. I mean, of course, other troops are deployed because the whole military is professionalized. Before, it used to be national servicemen and professional soldiers. National servicemen were not deployed in overseas theaters. That was the rule. So only the French Foreign Legion will go in. So it's still pretty much in existence. It had to soften its own, way of doing things, recruiting and that kind of things. And it's still, made up of all kinds, I think, 130 different nationalities, and they pretty much the spearhead of the French military, particularly, they've been waging a campaign in West Africa, in Mali, Niger for the past, since 2011, I think. So no, a bit later, 13. Yeah. pretty much the spearhead of the French military.
The officers are French, are they not?
Officers are French, and usually these are the guys who go to the French formation among themselves, those who come out of the top of the French military academy. And you do have some foreigners who then obtain French citizenship and go to officers. It's about 10% of foreign origin, but they have to become French citizens to become officers. The troops are not French.
Interesting. Well, Jean, thanks a hell of a lot for your time again. Very interesting. And I really appreciate your input, your recollections, and your observations, because you come from an unusual angle. And I think a lot of people from Rhodesians or ex-Rhodesians are enjoying just hearing from you your perspective as you saw it as somebody who wasn't from Rhodesia coming into it. So it's been very enlightening.
I just wanted to maybe go back as an homage, if you want, to what we talked earlier on about the Mapai operation. Okay, as you know, that's where we lost. We had for us a massive loss when that Puma went down. There were 3 South African crews, and then I think 10 of our guys, 10 or 11.
16
of our troops. Okay. As I said, I was in a different group. I was initially in the mining party. That's when I described that escape we made. For me, it was a defining moment. That time, and I knew a few people on that helicopter. One of them was a Australian guy called Stephen King, and we shared a flat. I didn't know him for long. He moved in. One of my friends had moved out, but nice guy. I mean, he was my flatmate. I knew his girlfriend, Marina, and when I went back and I had to pack all the stuff in my apartment. And then there was Log Anston's brother when we heard about that as well. Captain Small, who had been my instructor, I'd been on the demolition course. Bright guy, Rhodes Scholar, amazing man who could have had a career in engineering and anywhere in the world and had served in the Rhodesian army. So that was a defining moment. Many respects, massive loss. I explained to people that it's like the British Army losing 3,000 men in one single day.
Yeah,
that's what it meant to us.
Yeah,
so this is like World War I, battle. 3,000 men. This equivalent in the population of the UK. Also, because at the time we realized we could no longer go in and do our fire force stuff. And this is where they started thinking into turning the battalion into an armored battalion to go and hit those targets, because those targets have been hardened.
Yes.
We can do that anymore. We didn't feel defeated. We just realized that the war had changed somewhat, and we had to adjust to it. And of course, people we knew on that aircraft, which was a big loss for Rhodesia. It was massive, given the small population. So for me, it was a defining moment. As you know, it's still much not celebrated, but remembered. It was a really defining moment for all of us. Log Anston, as you know, lost his brother in that chopper. And that was a massive blow for all of us. He was extremely brave when this happened. I would hate to imagine losing my young brother at that age. So yeah, it was really a defining moment. It was a defining moment for the RLI, that Operation Uric.
Yeah, I think we all left wondering what it was all about. If things could have happened differently, we'll never know the answers. And we all lost friends and people that were very close to us in the process, and I suppose we'll be looking for answers until the day we die. But I can't help but feel we better for trying to do what we did. I think history has justified our cause. Whether that makes it any easier for anyone to deal with the past or not, I don't know. But I think we're all proud of having tried to do what we did.
I'm not asking myself. I know for a fact what unfolded in Zimbabwe afterwards. It was not independence per se. It's independence is handing power to the wrong people, because we all were in the process of handing power to majority, but a responsible majority.
Yes.
So for me, as I said before, what happened, sadly, we were vindicated. It was just cause, but as I went in myself in the late 70s into that fight, it was with that objective in mind that Rhodesia could evolve towards a responsible majority rule.
Yes.
And I have absolutely no regret. I'm very proud of what I did, what we did. I don't question, sure, losses, death, parents who lost their sons in that war, their daughters, are still grieving. That's what happens in every war. But I think our fight, defense of that country was justified, and the fight to maintain what we thought could be a harmonious society. All this is still very valid. So personally, I think we've been fully vindicated, and people should not feel any pain beside the loss of a dear one, obviously. But it was the right cause. It was the right cause. And people who are left in Zimbabwe, and I've been back many, many times. And relationship between the Black population and white people is still exceptionally good.
Yes.
And that tells you something, that there wasn't that hatred, that vindication, that's what that people. Right. So for me, I think I will never look at it. Sure, there were things, there were flaws, but they were being corrected.
That's right.
And we should be proud of what we did. We should be proud of what we did. Thank you. I'm sorry I stole one of you girls in the process, but it's all forgiven now.
Oh, lovely stuff.
As we discussed before, Hannes, I mean, the Rhodesian War was full of unique stories, unique episodes. And I remember we had the son of Tabra of Tabex. Tabex was an extremely successful tobacco company.
Yes.
His son was Paul Tabra. His father,
Tony Tabra.
Yeah, and his son was Paul, and Paul reached military age, and his father, with all his millions, didn't try to get him out of. He made his son go. His son went to RLI, did it, and then was posted to support commando, and he was in my troop. Okay, the sole pioneer, and he was a shy guy, not very. He didn't have a typical Rhodesian build. He was not a very physical guy, a shy, unassuming, bright kid. He did extremely well. He took over his father's business later on, and the company was sold, but he's in Europe. Hope he doesn't mind mentioning him. And one day we're in Grand Reef. We just returned from R&R. We just maybe same day, and that private plane lands on the airstrip in Grand Reef, twin engine, I remember, Cessna or something. And we looked at that because it was still used occasionally by private aircraft. And out of the plane comes Paul Taylor. His father had flown him back after his R&R directly to our base in Grand Reef. It's almost like he picked him up and, hey son, off you go. Back to war. And that kid was a millionaire's son, okay? And his father made him do his duty. And this is, again, a tribute to really the spirit of Rhodesia. And you guys didn't look at it this way because it was part of your environment. But me, as a foreigner coming from Europe, which was become very, I was impressed. I was impressed. And so, again, tribute to the Rhodesian spirit.
Lovely story.